Let's build a Pokemon memory match game like this one with vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What's up, everyone? My name is James Hewick, and I do weekly videos on web development related topics, and I do a lot with vanilla JavaScript. I have a lot of fun building these simple apps with vanilla JavaScript, no frameworks, no additional tools, just your basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I think it's a great way for us to kind of get back to the basics and kind of get creative with JavaScript instead of leveraging framework, although frameworks are also awesome. So in this video, we're going to build a Poke Match game. It's a memory match game where we're going to click on a card. It'll show a Pokemon, click on another one, show another Pokemon, and continue to play that just like any memory match game that you've probably seen before. Now, this could obviously be done with any type of content. The Pokemon API is just free and it's fun to work with, and I'm a big Pokemon fan. So that's what we're going to build. Let's go ahead and get into it. But before we do, I want to take a second to talk about the sponsor of this video, which is Agora.io. Agora is a real-time voice and video engagement platform for meaningful human connections. They provide an SDK and building blocks to enable a wide range of real-time engagement possibilities, including voice calls, video calls, interactive audio, and video streaming. They also provide a low-code, no-code solution, including their developer SDKs that work on a variety of different platforms and allow you to add video calls to your applications in a few lines of code. With the UI kit, you get several different features that are built in, like multiple layout support, including floating, grid, collection, and custom. You get support for video call and live broadcasting, active speaker support with a floating layout, etc., etc. Lots of features built right in to take your live audio and video experiences to the next level with just a few lines of code. So if you want to check out Agora, you can use the link in the description below to embed video in your application in just 3 simple steps. All right, so I am inside of a blank folder inside of VS Code, and I have an extension. I'm actually really curious if people can help me out and let me know if this works. I have a create web boilerplate extension. And what this does is it just creates or just web boilerplate extension. It just creates basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files for us. So I'm going to actually run that command. I'm curious. I've heard people say that this doesn't work for them, and I'm not sure why. But if I run this command, it's going to generate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. If we look inside of the HTML, we've got basic stuff there. We can update this title to be Poke Match. And then we're already referencing the CSS file in our script, so that stuff should be set up. Then I'm going to use one of my favorite extensions, the live server extension, and click go live. This will give us a live reloading server running on port 5501 for this application. So if we come in and add a little bit of markup, so H1 and say Poke Match, that should, after we save, that should now live reload, which is exactly what we want. So we've got this connection here between the code in VS Code and then in the browser for it to auto refresh. And now we can actually dive in to start working on the project. So the markup inside of the HTML is actually going to be relatively simple. I'm going to use image snippets here. You can see what I just did. .container is going to create a div with a class of container. And we'll just have a few different things in here. So we're going to have this container, which is going to contain everything. And then we'll have a header element. And this is going to contain the H1 as well as a button. So this button will have an on click. My phone just fell off the thing. Anyway, so I have an on click that's going to call a function called reset game that we haven't written yet. So we'll do that a little bit. And we'll just have that be reset. And then after the header, we're going to have a div with an ID of game. And that's basically all we're going to have inside of the markup. We're going to dynamically generate the board in JavaScript and call the Pokemon API, etc. So that's all the markup that we're going to need for now. So we can move over to our JavaScript file and start to look for stuff there. So inside of our JavaScript file, we're going to need to work with the Pokemon API. So what we're going to do, if you looked at the Pokemon or the Poke Match game a second ago, what we'll have is 16 cards, which means we need to have 8 different Pokemon that are repeated twice. So we need to call out to the Poke API for that. So this is the Poke API. I'll include a link in the description below so you can go and check it out yourself. And so I'm going to copy over the Poke API base URL. So this is https://pokeapi.co/api/v2/Pokemon. And what we're going to do is add on a number. So we're going to generate 8 random indexes for Pokemon, and what's going to get returned is information about that Pokemon. Specifically, what we want, a couple of things are not all this stuff, there's a lot in here, the name, the ID, and then we'll want the sprite. So this is an image for it. And we'll also want let's see if we can find it, not the stats, but the type. So we'll want to get the main type, and that way we can do a colored background for the individual Pokemon. So let's start by creating a function called load Pokemon. So we want to const load Pokemon equals, create a new function. We're going to use async await in here, so we can go ahead and mark this function as async. And let's just start by making a request to Poka API base URL, and then add on the string of 1, for example. So this should get the information for Bulbasaur. So if we were to await these results, actually, if we say bol or response actually equals await fetch. So we're using the fetch API, the built-in fetch API, and we're making it request to this endpoint. And then we want to convert that data to get the JSON body out of it. So we can call the res.json. That returns a promise, so we can await that to actually get the Pokemon data. So from here, I'm just going to log out the individual Pokemon. So this should, inside of the console, give us the information about the individual Pokemon, which we do not see. So we need to actually call this function. So we'll call load Pokemon down here at the bottom. Now, hopefully, we'll see Bulbasaur is logged out. Actually, it says Metapod, which is weird. Did I type in 1? Let's check the network tab. I don't know why that didn't work. For some reason, it repeated. I think because I had the 1 in here. So weird. These random errors are fun to catch. So this should now be Bulbasaur. There we go. There's Bulbasaur. So what we want to do is we want to get 8 random Pokemon. And so what I want to do is generate an array of random IDs, and then we will iterate through the array of random IDs, and then go and make a fetch request for each one of those. We can be a little bit more intelligent, though, because we want these to be unique. We don't want to repeat these IDs. We can use what's called a set. So I'm going to create random IDs and say we're going to use a new set. Now, a set is an object data structure similar to an array, but it already takes care of deduping, or making sure we don't have duplicates in the set. It also has a constant lookup time to see if something exists in the set, which is not really important here in terms of performance because this is so small, but could be really important if you get down into the or the big O notation for performance for this. So in this case, we're going to use a set, and we'll have a while loop. And since we want to generate 8 different items, we want to continue to add random numbers to this until the size. So random IDs.size until that size, or while that size is less than 8. So we're going to add stuff to this, but it's the set is going to take care of not adding duplicates. So if we add 2, then we try to add 2 again, there's still only one number in there, which is the number 2. So now we want to create a random number each time. And what we'll do is we'll take math.random. This is going to generate a decimal between 0 and 1. We want to multiply that by 150. And then often what you'll see is you'll wrap that whole thing with math.floor. So that would actually give you a number between 0 and 149, but we want 1 and 150. So instead we could call ceiling, which will round this thing up, and it'll give us 1 to 150. And I'm just using 150 as the original set of Pokemon. You could go up to the however many Pokemon there are. I really don't know, 500 or something now. So we get that random number, and then we add it to our set. So we call add of the random number. And at the end of this, if we log out an array version of the random IDs, so notice I'm using the spread operator to convert that set to an array. Hopefully what we'll see is an array of 8 random numbers between 1 and 150. So it looks like that's working. Now what we could do is we could iterate through each one of those. So if we did a regular for array, got a little snippet in here to help. If we iterated 0 or I equals 0 less than that didn't do what I wanted, less than the random IDs dot length I plus plus. And we may need to, can I do this in there? Maybe I can't. Can I do this, we may need to assign this to a variable first. I'm not going to write it like this in the end, which is why I'm just kind of showing you for demo purposes. Does that work? That does work, which is okay. So what we would do is, as we're iterating through each one of these items, we would make the request. So we could actually copy open or copy up this fetch request, the get Pokemon, etc., and then pass in the value inside of that array. Now, this could work. Let's just simplify this a little bit. So we'll say random IDs array equals, and now do this. All right. So now we're actually working with array. So this would work if we then pass in the random IDs array of I. So that would grab that specific one, and then we can log out this individual Pokemon. So this should log out 8 different Pokemon. We'll talk about why we're going to update this in a second. If we look in here, looks like we got undefined. Okay. Random IDs array. And this should be random IDs array as well. Now that we get 8 different Pokemon, so we get Grimer and Vulpix, it looks like that's working. Now, the problem with this, it's not that big of a deal because this is not that big of a performance implication, but we're having to wait until we get each individual Pokemon before we get the next. But really, they're not dependent upon each other, which means we could go and get them kind of concurrently with each other and use something called promise.all. So if you create an array of promises, you can have them all kind of run concurrently. When they're all finished, you could then handle the responses. So we're going to take advantage of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our random IDs array. And actually, we don't really need this in a variable anymore. So we actually can do the spread right in line. So we're going to spread that out into a new array that we don't assign to a variable. And then we're going to map over each one. So this is the array map function where we get access to each ID. And then what we want to do is call the fetch here. Call that fetch, which will do kind of what we just did, but not await it. So we're actually saying call the fetch, and it's going to return this promise and add that promise to this new array. So we'll call this Poke Promises. All right. And then we can log this out. So Poke Promises. So you see what this is. It should be an array of promises. And what are we missing in here? Oh, I think we just got an extra. There we go. So let's save this. This should random IDs array is not defined. Yes, that's because in this case, instead of referencing the array, we're just referencing the ID that we get access to inside of the map function as we iterate through. Res is not defined as well. Let us get rid of that. Okay, now we should be caught up, and we should see that this is 8 different promises. So the way we handle this is we call promise.all. Don't know where that came from. So we take our promises and throw them into a promise.all. So Poke promises. And promise.all, I say let all these things run concurrently. So we want to wait for that to all finish, and we'll get back the results in here. The one last thing we need to do is actually convert those results, which are still promises. Let's see, let's log out. Or actually, they're not promises. They are the actual results, but we need to call the res.json on each one that returns the value. So if you see here, this is an array of responses. We actually want an array of, we'll call this responses. We want an array of the actual Pokemon. So we can do almost the exact same thing as what we just did. So we can take our promise.all and we can take our responses and map over each one of those, get each response, and then call res.json on each one. So the only thing we're not doing here is separating out this part into a separate variable. So same general idea. And then what this should be is our Pokemon in the end. So if we wait for all of these things to finish converting these responses to JSON, we should get them all in our Pokemon data. So if we go and run this, we should now see that we have an array of 8 random Pokemon to show that this is random. So there's Persian as the first one. And then if we do this again, we should see this is Raichu, so different Pokemon. So that seems to work well. And then what we'll do in this function is just return this in the end. Cool. So we'll clean this up a little bit like that. So there's our load Pokemon function. And now we want to have a display Pokemon function. And I do this a little bit of a hacky way. So we'll kind of have some fun with it. We'll call display Pokemon. And we'll pass in the Pokemon. Pass in the Pokemon here. And I'm going to create a function called, let's see, reset game, I believe. So let's create our reset game. And what this is going to do, it's going to be an async function. It's going to get the Pokemon from the load Pokemon function. And since that's an async function, we will await the results. And then it will pass that into the display Pokemon function and pass in those Pokemon that we just loaded. So instead of calling load Pokemon, we'll call reset game. And then inside of Pokemon, we will, or display Pokemon, we'll say displaying Pokemon, just to show that this is all connected. Hopefully it is. So displaying Pokemon, great. So now we basically want to iterate through each one of these Pokemon and convert each one to some sort of Poke card. Now, the first thing I want to do is convert these to a random order. And you may be thinking that these were already created in a random order originally, and that's absolutely true. The trick here is now that we need to use this Pokemon array twice. We need to have each Pokemon be represented twice. So we could create an array where we take out the elements from the Pokemon array, spread them out, and then spread them out a second time. So now we're going to get an array that has each Pokemon referenced twice. The problem is they're not going to be in a random order. You'll see the first random order, then you'll see that same random order again, and we want the whole thing to be random. So we can take our Pokemon array, we can call sort. We don't need to reference that individual item, so we can actually just use the underscore to say we don't really care about what it's called. And then this is a neat little trick I learned from Anya Kubo, is we can call math.random minus 0.5. We'll randomly generate a number from negative 0.5 to 0.5, which can then be used in the sort to simulate a random sort. And then if we log out the Pokemon, it may be hard to see. It probably will actually. So we probably want to log out the Pokemon names so that these are more readable. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to do a Pokemon map each P. This is code we'll delete. So log out P. So we're logging out each Pokemon. And in this case, I can shorten it to the name also. So hopefully what we'll see is we see a list of 8 Pokemon, and then we do not see that exact same order down here. So all this stuff is randomized, which is exactly what we're wanting. So we can get rid of the logging, and now we can start to generate the markup for these individual cards. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the Pokemon, I'm going to map over them, get a reference to each individual Pokemon, and then what I want to return is basically an ES6 template literal string. So in this template literal string, I want to just kind of create some markup, some HTML. So I'm going to create a div with a class of card, and then inside of this div, I can do an h2, and then inside of here, I can do Pokemon.name. So this is the basics of what we're doing. So for each one of these Pokemon, we're converting it to an HTML string, which then returns to us, excuse me, an array of Pokemon string. So if I log this out to show you what it looks like, you should see that we have an array of strings. So here's our array of strings. It looks really gross. What we can do now is get rid of the log, and we can call join on these to make them into one big string. So join them like this, and then assign this to a variable called Pokemon HTML. And then lastly, what we want to do, I have a little snippet in here for getting elements by ID. But we want to get the game element. So remember that from our HTML a while back. There that is. So div with an ID of game, we get a reference to that. And then we set game.inner HTML to be Pokemon HTML. What we'll see, hopefully, is now we have our Pokemon listed on the page, which is really neat. So we're able to go and grab the random set of Pokemon that we want for our game, display them on the screen. We still got some styling to do, obviously, but we've at least got the information displayed on the screen. And we'll update this stuff more and more as we go through. Okay, so now that we have this data, what we probably want to do is start to style it. So let's go into our CSS and let's start to have some fun with the styling so we can get a better look at what we're using. Now inside of here, I'm going to copy over. I wonder if I can copy and paste in like this. I can, cool. So this is a Pokemon font. You could search online if you want to include this in yours too. So I'm going to say I'm going to use this as a font face. So this will be font face. And then we'll say the font family is Pokemon. And we'll take the source and say this is coming from a local URL pointed to Pokemon.ttf. And then inside of our container, which is where everything is going to be, I'm just going to set the font family to be Pokemon. So this will start to give us a little bit of fun styling in here. These are actually like way too close together, the letters. So I'm going to do letter spacing of 5 pixels to try to spread that out a little bit. Now it's a little more readable. So for this container, I want this container to center everything in the center of the screen, or at least horizontally. So I'm going to, I was using Flexbox originally, but I can probably just do margin of 0 auto, trying to center all this stuff on the screen. And to do this, we'll also need to set a max width of 800 pixels. So this should move everything to the center of the screen, which is what we want. So that will work. We also want to make sure this is the entire height. So we'll set the height to 100 VH. Also, or actually, I don't think we need that because I'm not centering this thing vertically completely. All right, so that should be the basics of our container. We can also set some padding of 20 pixels just in case we shrink down to get really small. We at least want some breathing room on the outside. Cool. Now we can start to do the basics of our header. And really what I want is the 2 elements inside of the header. If we go back to our HTML, the H1 and the button to sit side by side. So we're going to use Flexbox for this. So display a flex. Call align item center, that's vertically. And then we'll justify content with space between. And then we'll say this header is going to take up 100% of its available width as well. So this should start to put those on a different, or on the same line. And I just realized this is not the class header, but just an element of header. So now we've got that over there. So we've got those lined up nice. And now we can come into our game. So let's select our game. And I want this to be a grid of 4x4. So we'll call display of grid. And then we'll say grid template columns. And we want 4 columns. So we'll repeat and then say these are going to be 160 pixels a piece. I'm going to duplicate this line and change that for columns to be rows now. So now if we look, these are starting to be laid out in a grid, which is nice. So that's starting to look good. And then I want to add a little bit of gap between them. So we'll do grid gap of 10 pixels as well. Cool. So those are starting to look better. So now for our individual card, we'll add a box shadow, 0, 3 pixels, 10 pixels. Then we'll do RGBA, 200, 200, 200, 0.9. These are just made up values, so you can kind of come up with your own. We'll do border radius around the corners a little bit of 10 pixels. We'll do position relative. This will become important in a second. And then we'll have overflow of hidden. We'll see why in a second. And then we'll come back to a few extra styles. Cool. So we're starting to see this stuff lay out like we want. We've obviously got some more styling and things to do, but it's starting to look good for now. Now, as we continue to style this, we can now start to work on this flip animation of how do we get this thing to actually look like it's flipping. And to do that, we're going to have 2 different sections. We're going to have a front and a back of each card. So we need to actually update our markup to include that. So inside of our markup, let's go into here. Let's do a div with a class of front. All right. And on the front part of this, we only want to see a picture of a Pokeball. So we can actually do that part inside of CSS. Now I'm going to paste in this Pokeball image. All this is in the GitHub repository, by the way, if you want the font and the image. But there's our Pokeball. And since this has a class of front, I'm going to go to the CSS, target that class, and we're going to use a background image to be able to style this. So let's go down to front. I'm going to say this is background image with a URL pointing to the Pokeball. And then we'll say background position is going to be center. Background repeat is no repeat. and then background color is black. This is probably going to start to mess up some things. Do we have our class of front inside of here? We do, but I think this doesn't have a width and height yet. So I can go ahead and start to do our dot front and our dot back, even though we don't have back yet. Want to make sure that this will take up 100% of the height and 100% of the width. Let's see if that gets us a little bit closer. Cool. So there's our actual card. That looks good. Now, the other thing I'm noticing is that this actual board is not centered within that game container. And I think for the container, we can actually go back to help with this. We can use a display of flex. I was wondering if we were going to need it. And we can do a justify content of center. And I think, we don't want it on. We do want, so a couple of things we need to do. Sorry. We can set the flex direction to be column. But since we changed the flex direction, we can now set this to be align items, I believe. And hopefully that will center it. Cool. So now the board is centered within this bigger container, and those things are still lined up there. So that styling should work. All right, so let's go back to our JavaScript and let's update a little bit more of this card. So we'll have the front, and then we'll also have div with a class of back. So we'll have the front and the back, and we're gonna kind of switch between these. Now inside of this back card, that's where we have the Pokemon name. Oh, I never even closed that. And then we'll also have an image with a source of, and this is going to come from the Pokemon image. So this comes from the property Pokemon dot sprites dot front default. So I just know that that's the property that we're using, and then we'll set an alt with the Pokemon dot name as well. So let's see if we're actually seeing these. Can we, if I hover over front, can I get rid of front? Cool. So that stuff is showing up there. We need the ability, obviously, to toggle between these, but at least we're grabbing those images appropriately. And I think we'll actually flip. So we'll have the image and then the name after it. So we'll have the image first and then the name. Now, the other thing I'm going to add is a class of rotated, and that's because we're going to rotate the back first so that we only see the front, and then we'll flip and rotate the front and then rotate the back the other way. We'll see more about that in a second. Now, one cool thing I want to add, though, to add a little bit of styling, let's actually hide the front here. Does that work? I'm not sure if that works inside of our template literal string, so I will come back to that in a second, but I want to show this. So here's that card, and now I want to add a little bit of color to the background here. And I'm going to copy in a list of colors that I got from a video from Floor and Pop. So I'll come to this in a second. This is in the source code with the GitHub repository that you can go copy. But this is a map between the type of the Pokemon to a color. And so I'll show you, I'll put a link to this in the description below. But if I search Floor and Pop on YouTube for Pokemon or Pokedex, I should be able to pull up this video. You can go watch this for more details on how he set this up. But I copied those colors from him, and now I want to use these colors inside of these cards. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set the background color of the back. So we're just going to kind of add in an inline style. So style background color is going to be, we're going to grab a variable called color. And we're going to get this from color and say, it actually goes inside of here. So color is going to be Pokemon.types, and then we're going to get the first type, and then grab the type property, and then the name property of that. And we're going to use that as a key to grab. We can actually set this to type first. So there's the type, and then we can say the color is going to be colors of type. All right. And then lastly, if there is not one of those, we can just set it to normal. So if there isn't a type for some reason, we can set it to normal. And we can add optional chaining on here to make sure that we don't run into any errors of trying to access properties if these things don't exist, which they should, but just in case. So let's see if that actually updated the colors appropriately. It looks like it did not. I wonder if we have anything in our logs. Nope, nothing yet. So maybe we need to close out this tag for the background color. There we go. And now we see that these have different colors. So it adds a little bit of fun to the actual individual cards. Now, the one other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the style of background color, and I'm going to apply that to the card as well. This will kind of come into play when we start to rotate this thing. And I also forgot to copy back in the div with a class up front. So once we paste this back in, we should be back to just the black Pokemon card. Cool, so that works. And again, if we were to delete the front, we should see the back. So the front is just sitting on top of the back at this point. Now we've got some more styling to do. So inside of our CSS, the targeted styles for the front and the back will have display of flex properties. So display flex. And then we want to center everything horizontally and vertically and stack it with vertical by column. So we'll say flex direction is column. We'll say justify content is center. We will say align items is center. We'll say position is going to be absolute. So remember, we made our parent the card position relative. We'll say this is going to be position absolute. Should sit on the entire thing. And we'll add a little transition here in a second. So we shouldn't see a whole lot, I didn't think, of difference in this, except for maybe we're getting into some Z indexes, which is really interesting. I'm not actually sure where that comes into play. We're going to fix this because we're going to kind of manually hide this stuff in a second. That's kind of interesting. So we're going to add, if you remember, we added a rotated class to the back. To the back earlier inside of our markup. So the rotated is going to be a transform of rotate Y, and we're going to rotate that 180 degrees. So this will rotate the back of the card to start, and now we need to actually have that actually come into play. So for the card, we want to add a transform style of preserve 3D. And then on the front and back, we want to add back face visibility of hidden. So now once we do this, we should see, except for this maybe, that's interesting. There we go. Oh, that's because I deleted that element before. But we see now we only see the front, and that's because the back is flipped and it won't show the back if it's flipped based on this back face visibility. That makes sense. I'll have a link to the tutorial that I followed on how to do the flip animation too, if you want to check that out and learn more. All right, so the only thing that we're missing now is the ability to actually flip these two from front to back. So we're going to add a transition property to the front and back. So we'll add a transition. On transform, we want that to transition over 0.5 seconds. Now what we need to do is go into our JavaScript now and actually handle the clicks on these cards so that we can toggle them back and forth. So inside of our cards, we're going to set an on click on the card. And we're going to call a click card. We want to pass in the event as well. So we're going to call a function called click card. I'm also going to add a custom property so that we add a Poke name to each individual item. So this is going to come from Pokemon.name. This is a way that we can check to see which one of these Pokemon was actually clicked on. Inside, don't want to do that. Inside of a new function called click card, we'll take in the event and then we will just log the event. So now we should handle clicks on the individual cards. And when we do this, we want to figure out which one of these cards is clicked. Now, typically, I would look for the event.target. The problem with this is that when we click on this Pokeball, it's actually the front thing that's being clicked and not the card itself. We want the click handler to be on the card. So even though we set the click handler, the on click on the card itself, event propagation is coming up from clicking on something inside of that card. So we actually want a property called current target. This will give us the actual thing that we're listening for. So now we get this card, and now we can grab the Poke name from our current target.dataset.poke name. So this is how you get access to custom JavaScript properties or custom HTML properties in your JavaScript. So there's all the names of the Pokemon that we are clicking. Cool. So now we're making a lot of progress. So with that, if we want to flip this thing, we need to get the front and back from this element. So from the current target, we want to get the front and the back elements. So I'm going to say this is the Pokemon card. And I'm going to paste in a little function to help us with this. All right, so this is a function called get front and back from card. So you pass in a card, it does a query selector for the divs with class of front back, and then it returns that. So from that Pokemon card, we can actually get those front and back elements. So we can say from the array that it returns, we want to grab the front and the back. Those are the first two properties, matches up here. The naming doesn't matter. This is just our naming the first element and the second element. And we want to get this from the helper function, get front and back from card, passing in the Pokemon card. Now what we can do is we can take our front and back and we can toggle the class of rotated. So we can call front.classList.toggle of rotated, and the same thing for the back. So now what should happen is we actually get our flip effect. And if we click it, it closes again. Pretty neat. I think this is really cool. So that flip effect actually looks really, really nice, and we're able to toggle this by clicking on it. The extra logic that we want to use though is we don't want to have it, we don't want to let the user click again on the same card to turn it back over. We want to do some checks to see which element has already been clicked, etc. But this is kind of the basics of how we're going to start to handle these clicks and those animations of flipping that card over. All right, so the one thing I said we wanted to check for is if the front.classList.already contains, so if it already is rotated, we just want to return early. We're also going to keep track of an isPaused property. So we'll have const isPaused equals false. And then come down and say if, where's our check? If it's already rotated or the game is paused, we want to return early. So this is a little check for us to control when a user can click on things. We'll see that come into play in a second. After that, we're going to set the isPaused to be true. So if the game is not already, or if the clicking is not already paused and that thing is not already rotated, we want to go ahead and pause. And then we're also going to keep track of a property called first pick. So we'll say first pick, and we'll just initialize that, which will be initialized to undefined. I got to stop putting my phone in that position because it slides down my desk. So we'll have our first pick, and then we'll have our isPaused property. And the first pick is the first card that you click on to then click on a second. So if there is no first picked element, we're simply going to set first pick to the Pokemon card, and then we'll set isPaused to be false. So now we click an element, it won't let us click anymore, I think, because that thing is in fact paused now that we've already clicked one. Now we can go and update the rest of the logic to see what we need to do. Now I want to check to see if we do already have a first element that's picked. Let's add our else. We want to get the names of each individual Pokemon. So we'll say second Pokemon name equals Pokemon card dot data set dot Poka name. And then almost the same thing for the first Pokemon name, except this is going to come from the first pick. So that first pick that we're keeping track of, that's the element that we're going to reference to get that data set property, the custom property of Pokemon name or Poka name. Now we can check if first Pokemon name does not equal second Pokemon name. Basically what we want to do is flip these cards over. So now we want to flip both of them from being flipped over to now being not flipped over. And these should also actually go up here. So those should be up there. So we click on one, it flips the card over. We'll flip on the second one, it flips that card over. Now if those things don't match, we need to flip them both back over. So we already have a reference to the front and back of the second pick, but now we need to get a reference to the front and back of the first pick. So we can call that same function and call this first front and first back, We can call the same get front and back from card and pass in our first pick. Notice again, I can name these whatever I want. And then what I want to do is I want to take first front, first back, front and back, and all call the toggle of that rotated class. Since I have to do that for all of them, I'm going to create a helper function or just paste one in that will help do that for us. So I'm going to create a function called rotate elements. I'm making sure that this parameter is an array. And then for each one of those elements, I call the toggle list or toggle the class of rotated. So what this turns into is now I can call the rotate elements and I can pass an array of front and back and then get rid of these two lines. And now I can do the same thing down here for all four of these. So front, back, first front, and first back. All right, let's see how this works. So we click on an element, it turns over. Click on a second one, it turns over. It actually happens to be a match, so that stays. That's what we want. The problem is we're not unpausing. So let's actually let's refresh this, and most likely these won't match. And that happens so fast that we didn't even see it, I believe. So one of the things we want to do that I think will help with that is add this into a set timeout. So we want to call a set timeout. We're going to put a function in here. It's going to have a set timeout of 500 milliseconds and look like this. All right, so there's our function. So after a delay of 500 milliseconds, we're going to rotate each element. Then we're going to set the first pick back to null, and then we're going to say is paused equals false. Okay, now let's see if this looks a little more like. So there's Pharaoh and Machamp. It did a little delay and it reset. So now, but these two should stay, and then we should be stuck because we're not updating in case the user wins or in case the match is correct. So now if the match is correct, we're going to take a variable called matches and set that to increment itself. So we'll start that variable up here. And another thing we need to do inside of our reset function is go ahead and initialize those variables. So inside of reset, we want to make sure that those properties are set accordingly. So to be safe, we're going to take our game and set the inner HTML to be an empty string. We're going to take is paused and set it to true because we want to make sure they can't click on something until it's actually there. We want to set the first pick to null. We want to set matches back to 0. And then we can actually do a little bit of a similar trick to what we just did, where we'll have a set timeout. Inside of the set timeout, we'll call the get Pokemon and update them. And then we'll have this be a really quick delay of 200 milliseconds. After we finish all that, we'll say is paused equals false. So this is just making sure that like if we reset the game, they can't click what's already there until everything has been reloaded. So we shouldn't see really a difference, I don't think, except that inside of here, now the async needs to go in this callback function in the set timeout. So this still should work similar to what we had before. Great. Notice if I try to click really fast, so if I click a second one and click again, it doesn't let you click until that first one is finished, which is on purpose. So that's looking really good. And now we want to handle those matches. So if we get a match, we increment that value of matches. And then we say if matches equals the number 8, that means they got them all. And we can do a console log of winner. Regardless, or after that, we'll say first pick is going to be null to reset that. And then we'll set is pause to be false to let them continue. So I'll leave this as a challenge for you to go and update. What do you want to happen when the user wins? But that logic should be ready to handle this. So inside of here, we can click, and I'm just going to kind of play this through. Maybe I'll speed it up to try to find matches. Here's a match. And there is our last match, and it stays here. And again, the challenge for you is how do you take that and make it kind of fun at the end? So I think that's almost all of this. We could do a little bit of styling we forgot to do on our button. I'm just going to paste these in because these are pretty basic styles and it's not the real important part of this. But let's just paste in a couple of styles for font size, color, border, etc. And now you can see like when we finish, we can hit the reset button and it should go out and reload a whole new game that that we can play, which is really, really cool. So I had a ton of fun building this demo. If you'd like to see other videos where we build something fun with vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, let me know your ideas in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed it. One last shout out to our sponsor, which is Agora. So make sure to check them out as well. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one.